now.
Welcome everybody to this final Google Hangout for the contract management MOOC that's been running over the last 3 weeks. I hope that you've been enjoying the content of the MOOC. Today's presentation is contracts and automated negotiation. We've talked in the previous Hangouts around contract and digitization. And this Hangout and this discussion is intended to dive into a little bit more detail around automated negotiation and the technologies that are disrupting automated negotiation. Before I continue, I'm just going to ask Manuel if we could go on mute. Thank you. Sorry, everybody, for the background noise. So, to introduce our experts today, I'm joined again, as many of you will be familiar with, Tim Cummins, who's the Chief Executive Officer of IACCM, and Peggy Barber, who is President and Associate General Counsel at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So welcome both.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you. So, Peggy, I might ask if you could go on mute while I'm talking, because I'm getting a bit of an echo and I'm worried that it might be because of the connection between us. Thank you. I'm not really today, so apologies, everybody. If I start with you, IACCM has done a tremendous amount of research in the field of negotiation. Many people would think, how could machines possibly negotiate? How does automated negotiation work? An interesting area for us to explore, because there is quite a lot of desire still from humans for that face-to-face interaction and the ability for people to look each other in the eye when they're negotiating. So how can machines possibly involve themselves in a negotiating process?
Indeed, Sally, yes. Always whether or not negotiation is a science or an art. Is it a mechanism by which we try to achieve victory over the other side? You know, very often you have negotiators who celebrate because they've managed to impose a particularly clever or onerous deal on the counterparty, as if somehow the negotiation was the end point. Of course, many, I'm sure Becky will build on this point, many organizations have experienced the environment where you achieve victory in the negotiation and utter defeat in the actual overall contract. At the same time, there are others who, of course, would say that face-to-face negotiation, to the point you're making, is important because it's part of the ritual. It's a way that you build trust and build and there's absolute validity to that, of course. I think, as with so much of the other, many of the other areas we've talked about with automation, it's a matter of understanding when automation is appropriate and when animation is needed. And with the other areas we've discussed, machines can't, in their own right, today at least, exercise judgment. But in environments where judgment is not necessarily the point, then absolutely machines can undertake a negotiation. Equally, we've got to think about the blending. And is there in fact benefit often in people physically meeting, or does that in fact course, a ritual where there is a lack of openness and honesty and transparency, because I better not admit that to you or confess that, because you might take advantage of me. So, as you rightly say, experiments in this area are actually going back quite a number of years. We embedded into our negotiation training plan teams that were set up, negotiators. We used to give them an instruction. We used to give them about 4. And so they were essentially in a situation where they were doing a trade-off over a potential delivery date, warranty terms, and I forget what the 4th component was, but there were 4 of them. And so they would be getting a short just like what their priorities were, given the background of the case study. And then also, no pressure. Told they were going to have 40 minutes to reach agreement. And if they went back to the office without an agreement, they would lose their job. So, a little bit extreme. We could have thought that would have acted as quite a strong incentive. The interesting thing was that we then divided those teams, and half of them went away to have one-on-one negotiation with their counterparty across a table in a fairly traditional negotiation form. The computer. They didn't talk to or meet each other at all. They simply had to put in their preferred income into the computer. The computer then did the calculation and came back to them with a proposed optimum solution on the balance of their positions. Those parties could then review their proposed optimum solution and could go and say, well, actually, no, given what you've come back with, actually, maybe that warranty issue isn't quite so important to me after all. The interesting thing is that at the automated negotiation, those teams all saved their jobs. Every one of them came out with a negotiated solution. But 50% of the people who were doing the traditional animated negotiation didn't reach agreement in the time limit. They all lost their jobs. But also, the value that was achieved in the automated negotiation consistently was greater than in the animated negotiations, where personality, power, influencing skills all came into play and didn't get the optimal mutual deal. So very interesting findings, and I think a very clear example of where automated negotiation can be undertaken.
Yes, Tim, thank you. And just to remind everybody, I apologise because I omitted to say at the beginning of this hangout that you can submit questions to us, the Future Learn Step, and also the YouTube chat. And also to say I have deliberately turned off the camera now. I do apologise. You don't get to see the wonderful faces of Tim and Sally anymore. But I think it was interrupting our connection somewhat. I think that the camera stays turned off, so I hope that's okay. We have actually had a question from Amanda Thompson already, so thank you, Amanda. And hopefully, but we'll probably just sort of dig into a bit more detail if there were some connection issues with what Tim was just saying. I'm just wondering how negotiating with a machine will affect the relationships that can be built during negotiations between the parties. And Peggy, I'm going to bring you in at this point, and I'm sure you'll have some examples of this, but Amanda, whilst you say that, and I understand your point, that issues that you often find in negotiations is this sort of misunderstandings, but actually it can be the humans themselves that cause those misunderstandings and inevitably prepare for some failure through the project itself because of those misunderstandings. Whereas what you were just explaining, Tim, was very much that the machines can a lot of the human emotion, a lot of the lack of understanding and clarity during those conversations. You can give your thoughts to Amanda's point, and do you see some benefits in the machine-to-machine negotiation and taking out some of that human emotion and the lack of clarity that humans can bring to the process?
Thanks, Sally. And yes, I mean, I absolutely agree that when we are negotiating, we can often talk past one another. You're talking with issues in your mind, the other side is doing the same. And where you actually do get clarity in many cases is when you actually boil it down into the actual language itself. And where the machine can really help is to analyze the language that you've agreed to in the past or what either party would like to achieve, and actually help to select what you're trying to jointly achieve. It does not mean that it substitutes for all discussions between the parties, but where you could really use, and where I've found to be able to use what we've agreed to or what we have done as a company in the past, or what have, and understanding my own position and where I'm trying to get to. Sometimes in explaining those, you open up more issues and more discussions when that's really not even the intent also. So it is helpful, it could be helpful to actually have a tool kind of help you through those and give you options for, again, specific language that can cover the concerns that are being raised, can kind of vet through all the concerns and the language and like you said, Sally, the human emotion, and actually get to the heart of the issue.
I think, Sally, another of the big differences that we observed in our experiments was that undertaking negotiation via a machine requires much more discipline in your planning. So the teams that were required to do it via the machine had to enter data in a structured way, which meant they had to undertake their planning of their priorities, of their desired endpoints and their compromise points, because otherwise the machine couldn't do the calculation of that interface. So it had the twin benefit that, like I said, it created a level of openness and transparency and goals which didn't expose. Nobody else could see it, only the other machine could see. And so you were less nervous about being open and honest than you would have been. It took the deviousness out of things, if you like. But more than that, as I said, it actually created this discipline of planning. We all know that despite, I think, the training that most of us have undertaken, that the number of times when you're planning your negotiation, maybe in the taxi on the way to the negotiation, and you get into the room and the team has not really reached consensus, and the lead negotiator, that idiot from finance or that idiot from somewhere else suddenly blurts out something they didn't want to have happen. It's all of it. A much harder to manage process, and the machine actually drives a discipline that we often lack.
Yes, indeed. Peggy, one of the things that we've discovered in our research is this desire of people be face-to-face in negotiations and fear of machines. I wonder if we can explore a little bit what drives that fear and how we change the mindset to encourage people to see us augment the process and our role rather than to be frightened of it.
Well, so, I agree. I think at Hewlett-Packard, we have been doing actually quite a lot in this area to try to, in the name of really simplifying, empowering, and ensuring that people are doing the work that is most interesting and challenging to them. So starting with work that is really low risk and should be low touch in terms of negotiations and support. And what we find is that, I think part of it is messaging. When you say that, hey, I'm going to have a machine do what you do, uh, the first thing that somebody thinks of is, well, are you saying that my contribution is not valuable? And as Tim just said, in order to actually have a machine um, do negotiations and substantively help and take time out long term, it actually takes somebody, or actually multiple people, a lot of effort to think about how to capture what a human does and a human, um, how we make decisions, and actually put that into a tool and then trust a tool to do that part, so that you actually then have the ability to do other things that are higher values. So I think there is a human, just a natural reaction to the fact that somebody says, well, let's just figure out if a machine can do it. One of the things that we have been trying at Hewlett Packard is to see if we can have a machine actually just take our standard terms and have customers um, just go in, customers or suppliers just go in, they can look at our standard terms, they can tell us what they don't like, and we have different provisions in the background that they can select and decide on their own. Do they like this one better? Do they like that one better? Does it address their concerns better? In that way, it's a baby step to reducing negotiations that may, again, be helpful in kind of changing that mindset, to see how negotiations can help in areas that your contracting and legal population may think is a difficult, kind of a more of a waste of time for them. I think many of us, when we go into negotiations and we look at the number of issues that come up, like, why does somebody even care about those? Why are we really negotiating those types of issues when we could really be looking at something much more substantive? I think it'll be a challenge as we get to contracts that are more robust, higher risk, to actually go full automation. But I think automation, or certainly tools, can be helpful in even our own understanding of how we negotiate. We may think that we never agree to certain terms, we never do this, or we never do that. But in reality, you may be surprised when you actually use tools to help you understand how you approach negotiations, to better understand if you can agree to certain things or should agree to certain things. We've found that in cases where some people have said, oh, we never agreed to this, we may have agreed to it 100 times, in which case, if you agree to it, why did we do that? And can we be more proactive and in thinking about how we negotiate, which then, I think we have to actually do our own prep. And then you populate it into a tool. I think you have to get the buy-in from the organization, but if you do it in a way that helps them and helps them understand why this is helpful and where the future is for them once the tool is implemented, it makes it a lot easier.
And Peggy, I think it's interesting as well, when Tim has obviously talked about negotiation planning and the fact that using a tool like this can really drive greater discipline in the negotiating process. As you are very familiar with, IACCM carries out regular research on the most regularly discover that people focus on what are in fact the wrong terms, terms like limitation of liability, indemnities, warranties, which, whilst they have their place in negotiation, focused on at the expense of the important terms such as scope and goal. So again, do you feel that using automation can really drive a better focus of negotiations as well as just the general approach?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a tremendous value to automation. I do absolutely agree that when somebody comes to me and says, well, what do you think about um, the limitation of liability cap? It's really high. My first question is, well, what are we doing? And what are the risks here for which we could trigger liability or indemnity, and the like. And so the tools really, I mean, there's so many really great tools out there. There's so many people thinking about this issue in addition to and you hear about it every time we go to a conference on the topic at ISCCM and others, that you hear about the great innovations that are here. And one of the key things is that that I emphasize internally is you can't have tools replace the work that's needed to make those tools useful. And so going back to the negotiation planning and thinking about what is most important, I can get a great liability cap and a terrible scope and delivery obligations, and that is not accomplishing the goals that you want. And so in thinking about how you look at automation, there's a lot that automation can do for us, and that's going to increase. And I think you have to think about where it is the most useful for you, and where you can really see it being a game changer for your organization. And that takes a significant amount of thinking and outside the box thinking and planning.
I think just building on that a little, Peggy has been talking about the importance of tools, and I think negotiation is thought of in that context of the broader strategic approach to a negotiation, or the different methods that you can use. Obviously, we have email available to us, and a lot of people finish up negotiating by email. That can sometimes be okay, but many times is not. It's an area which actually adds very often to that misunderstanding or even adversarialism. It may be appropriate to use video conferencing, assuming you can get a good connection. Obviously, moving from there, there are many other conference calls, etc. So of technologies available to us now, and we need to think about automated negotiation tools as a component in that overall set of alternatives. And communication protocol, as we know, is a really important area today that organizations have. So trying to determine what is appropriate at what phase of the negotiation. It may well be that for a lot of those boilerplate terms, that this negotiation would again be a lot faster and more efficient in reaching agreement on topics that you up with a compromise anyway. We know from our work looking at standardization and creation of principles for things like liabilities and indemnities that the parties tend to start from polar opposite positions but fairly consistently finish up in pretty much the same position. Waste of time, that is. And of course, growing numbers of legal departments, as you know, because they're working with you on this, have recognized that that's absolutely alien to the philosophies of business today, as it wants to streamline, as it wants to cut cycle times and reduce. There will be areas of contract where it would be entirely appropriate to do things in an automated way, whereas other areas of the contract around perhaps some of the governance principles and other things, absolutely could benefit from that cooperation that could come from physical negotiation. So I think it's going to be, there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and the intelligent negotiator is going to need to add to their portfolio of skills the ability to understand the most productive way of managing the different phases of a negotiation.
Indeed, and I think, yeah, Peggy, go.
Yeah, Sally, if I could just jump in, I would also say that we should look at negotiation outside of a specific deal. As we talk about human interactions, do you have the face-to-face? How do you build the relationships to facilitate negotiations versus, automating negotiations? I think we need to think about building long-term relationships, of which some of the activities that go on between the parties is automated, but not all. And so particularly with our larger relationships, or now, a lot of the relationships are service oriented, ongoing. We're doing flex capacity as a service, and those types of relationships, those are long-term relationships. That does not mean that every aspect of your contracting relationship has to be automated. So you can very easily develop the relationships, but then agree that some parts of the relationship should be automated and low touch and others are not. So you can continue to build the relationship, but actually drive efficiency for both parties.
Yeah, Peggy, thank you. We're going to wrap up now, but so first of all, I want to apologize to everybody for the connection problems that we have had today, and I hope it hasn't disrupted your enjoyment of this hangout too much. There is one last question to finish on, which is, how can automated negotiation have any relevance in public? And I think, Tim, the answer to that is anything's possible, right? And whilst there's very often an assumption that there are never any negotiations in public sector contracting, of course, we know that that's not true. And certainly it would be my view that tools, as we have described them, would really support practices in public sector. Peggy, perhaps I'll come to you first and then I'll let Tim wrap up.
I agree. I think that while the public sector has its very specific procurement rules and processes and practices, it's also my experience in seeing the public sector that they are also looking for ways to innovate in a number of ways, whether it is in how they look at how they build solutions for their environment or whatever the case may be. So there are many public sector entities who were interested in streamlining how we negotiate, looking at their procurement practices and thinking if they can automate. And so, I would say that it'll take them a little longer, as it usually does, but I am, confident that we will get there.
Thank you. Tim? I think public sector is increasingly, there are different ways that you have to segment the nature of the transactions being undertaken, and that there are some where negotiation in the traditional sense is absolutely appropriate. I think there are others where maybe one doesn't call it negotiation, but where there is that it is smart practice to go to market at an early stage and understand the impact that your proposed terms and conditions are going to have upon price, delivery, perceptions of risk, the number of people willing to bid. And that arguably is in quite that same traditional way, because it actually precedes probably the formal RFP or documents to the market. But I think that early testing of proposed terms and conditions and the opportunity for industry to feed back upon what they believe would be a better set of terms and conditions that would be more advantageous, both in terms of cost, value delivery. That again is the sort of thing that absolutely can and should be automated, and could even enable that sort of discussion to occur with a level of anonymity that would inform and instruct the public servant in terms of the optimum deal proposal. They then go out with that in a perfectly equitable, non-negotiable form, because in a way they've already done the negotiation. To Peggy's point about being more innovative, more creative, there are rules, but there are many ways that you can work within those rules without losing value.
Indeed. Thank you. So I've turned the camera on in the hope that it's not going to disrupt the connection too much, but I just wanted to say thank you very much, Peggy, for your contribution today and your support during what's been a sort of tricky hangout. So thank you very much. Thank you, Tim, and thank you to the audience as well for your, and have more questions, then we'd always be delighted to hear from you at IACCM. So thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.